Boom. I wanted to talk again today about some of the disturbing data that we've been seeing and bridge into some of the optimistic points again from a technological standpoint. I don't know if any of you have been following Ed Dowd's work, but I've been following him for quite some time now. And there's some alarming data that's been emerging from many of these countries. Now, we've talked about them before. Again, I'm not well versed in this space, but there is something that's very worrying to me. As a participant in the market, generally the markets have gone up as population has increased. And currently excess deaths and I believe the birth rates, well, first off, the birth rates have fallen off a cliff and excess deaths have started to rise. This could mean a huge inflection point for society where you, for the first time in my lifetime and probably a few lifetimes prior to this, you see the population line go down instead of up. Now, this is, I think, most easily highlighted by the birth rates and death rates in Japan. For every one person that is born, 2 people are dying, and that's not sustainable for an economy. To some degree or another, we're in a pretty precarious place where a lot of the technology that we've built needs these people up and running to make sure that everything works, from nuclear power plants, which for some reason people are deciding shutting off is a good idea. It seems that in our previous conversation, this degradation of society that we talked about, not just that the currency collapses, but that in fact the values of society collapse first, and then what you have as a knock-on effect is the collapse of that currency. Rather, the idea, instead of the money created the fall of, or like the fall of Rome wasn't decided by the fall, like the denigration of their currency, more so it was the denigration of the minds of the Romans that led to the devaluation of the currency through, I guess, the removal of silver often from their currency. And this brings us back to some really important hallmarks. Through this collapse, at this point, which I think is undeniable or inevitable, effectively, there's not a whole lot we can do to stop this. Once birth rates decline and excess death rates increase, we're at a point now where the only thing that can kind of take us over this gap would be technology. Now, you've probably heard the idea of the Great Reset, or you've heard communist slogans like "Build Back Better," puppeted from many of the world's politicians. And what I think is important to remember is that when a criminal tells you that they're going to do something, it is important that you listen to them, because they're usually telling you the truth about the crimes that it is that they're committed. There's actually a lot of great documentaries about this type of stuff. A lot of people kind of want to confess up front about the thing that it is that they did wrong. And the governments and the politicians seem to be no different in this place. They're all colluding together for something. And we don't know why this conspiracy has taken place, whether it's just an act of coincidence. All those things of who, what, and why are basically unimportant. What's important now is that you start preparing for what is coming. This Great Reset, the potential collapse of not just the US dollar, but the economy, and many economies around the world, I think, is becoming clearer to everybody. So I live in Costa Rica, for example. We have the Costa Rican colone. For a long time, it has been pegged against the dollar. As 2021 and 2022 started to take place, the currency became worth less and less next to the US dollar. But as US and American citizens came into Costa Rica to spend that dollar, it actually pumped up the economy. It was a positive thing. Now, and to some confusion of my own, the Costa Rican colone is worth more. Like, you can buy more US dollars with the Costa Rican colone, but this is hurting the local economy because as Americans come to spend their money here, that American money is now worth less. Now, each individual country is going to go through its own problems at its own times. But at this point, effectively we might be less than 6 to 12 months out from one of the greatest financial revolutions that we've ever seen. I've been a long-time proponent of Bitcoin for this exact reason. Non-state-backed, non-government affiliated, free choice money backed by technology is probably one of the most valuable revolutions of our time. As I segue into this next part though, I've talked about this a few times, is that over the last few years we've had these converging wave points start to hit one another. Almost like you were in a portion of the sea where you had multiple waves coming in from another angle. So not only do we have this abstraction in birth and death rates, we have most governments around the world whose debt to GDP ratios are totally out of whack. They're on the verge of hyperinflation as eventually they can no longer service the debts that they have. And this is a really unique space because it's not just the faith and confidence in the dollar or the currencies that are going to be lost, it's the faith and confidence in the entire system that's going to be taken down with it. And on the other side of this, I guess to somewhat of a positive note, or rather to a deflationary note, we've constantly talked about technology's effects on society. For instance, I have this wonderful DJI microphone. It's wireless. I could walk all the way back here. I could walk all the way up close. It's going to sound exactly the same. It's wireless. It's got this wonderful camera that records in 4K. But the important fact here is that 20 years ago, this type of technology was not only not available, it was not affordable to someone like myself. It was well beyond the range of my grasp at that moment. You needed some multi-million-dollar publishing company to produce content. Now, technology, every step that it goes forward, it's often decreasing the cost and ability to produce that work. And when ChatGPT first came out, 3.5 was not very good. It was novel, it was fun, you could ask it some questions, you get some funny answers back, it would make up stuff to fill in the gaps. But GPT-4 is a whole new ball game. I don't think most people who played with ChatGPT have played with GPT-4 yet. You do have to pay for it. But the level of quality of the content that you get written back from GPT-4 is unparalleled, like basically not even in the same ballpark as 3.5. It's orders of magnitude better. It can pass the bar exam. It can pass AP biology, chemistry. It's getting better at mathematics. And this last week, AutoGPT came out. So now you have these very large language models that can go out onto the internet. You can connect them to, say, a Twitter account, a Canva account, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion. You can connect it to all these different things and you can go, hey, ChatGPT, I want you to figure out how to do this thing for me. And it will go out and it will read the documentation about the thing that it is you want to do. It will learn then how to code. So now ChatGPT can learn discretionary text, and then from that infer, through its own reasoning process, how to code what it is that you need done. Like, let's say I want a Twitter bot. This is a massively deflationary process, and I don't think our society is ready for it. Now, on the bright side, we could say, well, Tio, you're talking about the birth and death rates going all out of whack, and this is something that could help solve that. Now, it's very pessimistic to think about the fact that society is going through its own downward trend while technology is in a direct trend upwards. But it's important to remember what this does for ourselves. I've never been able to code, but I can now use ChatGPT-4 to code at a very basic level just by asking it. Not only that, because ChatGPT-4 can read visual imagery, this is something that I had not yet understood. I think there's some very poignant conversations I've listened to where I think a lot of people still, myself included, up until just recently, believed that the AI that was using Stable Diffusion or DALL-E or ChatGPT-4 were different. Effectively, they're not. What the computers are doing now is creating their own language models that they can interpret. And there's emergent phenomenon. So I spent the last week kind of bumbling around the research papers and the research paper that Microsoft had done. I believe it was called The Spark of AGI. And it went over some very unique emergent phenomenon. Now, what I'm about to explain to you is baffling to me. It was also baffling to the people who were researching ChatGPT at this time. They would open up a blank slate of these language models and they would say, let's load only something like poetry into it. And for some reason, all of a sudden, ChatGPT would mysteriously start to know Persian or chemistry. Now, there's no reason why ChatGPT should have figured out, or these large language models should have figured out how to speak Persian from only English inputs. And it brings a much larger conversation to the top of the discussionary table, which I found myself diving into, which again is a bit more on the optimistic side, is that as we grow and we discover what technology is capable of, it also gives us a better redefinition of what it is that we are doing. Commonly, you look at colors and you hear sound and you go, oh, those are different things. But the computer is not interpreting them as different things. The computers are interpreting them as the same language model. So why can you go from learning English to all of a sudden understanding Persian? Is there maybe a deeper codex within the system, the larger language model, that might be taking place? And there's this kind of famous quote from the Bible. It says, in the beginning there was nothing, and then the Word of God created everything. Maybe what we've done a great disservice to ourselves in doing is assuming that all the other things like color or sound are not in fact language, that they are something like vibration. And now vibration is a very tedious word. It's very easy to go, oh, well, vibration, it's like not necessarily the same thing. Like radio waves are not the same as X-rays. But the universe doesn't seem to think so. The universe seems to think that it's all the same thing. And what's interesting here is that the computers are doing the same thing. The computers have coded large language models to perceive light, text, sound, color, thoughts, and reasoning, all under the same language model. Now, I don't know what this does over time, but I know what technology has done within my lifetime. It has massively reduced the cost of entry to any participant in multiple verticals. I cannot stress enough that if you are not playing around with AI, maybe that's not the great term for them, but these large language models, you're going to miss the next boat, because the next boat is all about who can generate the best prompts, who can ask the most interesting questions to the AI, and those prompts then generate the most unique answer as well. And we're stepping into a world right now where as the debt ceiling is breaking and pensions will probably never be able to be paid out and Social Security is on the verge of collapse in the next few years, population is on a downtrend, and everything for the human species itself does not look good. Like the warning signs are super, super bad. I live out here in the jungle with fresh water and food and storage for a long time now because I felt like we're pretty close to some of this stuff maybe breaking, and the human species is not really well set up to work with what happens should it break. But this new form of intelligence, these large language models, which I'm going to go ahead and just make the leap and say they're on the verge of some type of conscious intelligence, and we just keep raising the bar. We just keep going, well, yeah, it's all we needed to do was ask some questions and could it make some basic reasoning in the early Turing tests, and now we've just gone past all of that and said, well, it can pass all those tests, but let's make up some new tests like theory of mind. And ChatGPT is doing that now. So even though the human story looks very pessimistic, technology is on a direct upward trajectory to maybe being able to take over most of the everyday jobs on the planet. And I don't know what that does other than say, hey, because these large language models are going to take most people's jobs away, you better start to learn how to be creative in the way you ask these AIs question. So if you haven't done it yet, I highly suggest you play around with ChatGPT 4. Pay $20 to ask the damn thing some questions and catch up with what's going on, because it is profound and it is almost kind of mystical. Like the emergent phenomenon that I was reading in these papers where, if you just keep feeding data to these things and all of a sudden they're like, hey, you know what, we can speak Persian now. Like, I wish I could just after reading a bunch of books, all of a sudden, I could speak Persian. And it reminds me of the Matrix. It reminds me that we might be getting into a place where technology and humanity hit an inflection point that's hard to turn back from. And maybe they're supposed to be this way. I've never been one to try to judge what's going, or at least in my younger years, I was much more interested in trying to judge, oh, this is good for the world or this is bad for the world. I no longer take that standpoint. I have no idea what is going on. But the story looks to be leading us into a technological explosion where AI could get to the point where it can just go out, it can research, it can self-build. And I've seen sparks of that already on what I've asked to do. And that to me means everybody should be paying attention. So although this story started off a little pessimistic, things aren't looking good for humanity. There's a lot of data that needs to be uncovered. We need to get rid of the criminals, the crony, corrupt, not capitalism, but crony capitalism. The idea, fascism is here and it has taken over your governments already. The fact that you can create a product and have liability and indemnity from anybody being able to sue you, especially citizens, because you and the government decided that that's okay, That's a level of corruption and fascism that has not been seen since Nazi Germany. And until people start to recognize that, it's not going to get better. But when the system starts to collapse and the US dollar no longer pays for the corruption that it has been paying for a long time, I think we're going to see a lot of the truth come to light. And that's been happening as it is already. Anyways, just a quick update. I'll do some more market updates. I'm still bullish. Still think we head to $42,000 Bitcoin. I think most of the markets are going to continue upwards for the next, like, say, 90 to 120 days. I think it's part of their systemic crash. They need people to be a little hopped up on the drug of money while we go through some of this discovery process with these corrupt corporations. And then I think we're going to be into a very, very different world over the next 5 or 10 years. So buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. See you at the Arcade Bear. We'll see you on the next one.